A good metaphor to think about Hurricane Lee, it's like somebody who lived a long life, very active, but they were also relatively well behaved. So this is a long-lived hurricane in which it became quite intense. In fact, of the case study hurricanes that we've looked at, this is where we're going to find the lowest air pressure and the highest wind speeds. Further, Hurricane Lee occurred in September, very predictable in terms of the type of hurricane. It's what we call a Cabo Verde or a Cape Verde, and that's because of these islands right here. And it's quite common in this time of year, late August, September, to have hurricanes and low pressures come through this particular area. Sometimes those low pressures, those tropical depressions, they, because of wind shear or something else, might cause them to go away. Other cases, like Hurricane Lee, it's just brewing right across the Atlantic, where it then came across warm, moist waters of the Atlantic Ocean and became a very perfect hurricane. What do I mean by perfect? When we think about wanting to show a hurricane that has that eye wall, that clearly defined eye wall, that clearly defined eye, this had it. When we have that big, huge, central dense overcast, that's almost a perfect circular or oval round shape, this one had it. The nice, neat, organized spiral bands coming out in each direction, showing the direction of that low pressure center as that air goes to the center. That clearly shown. So this is what I talk about, a perfect hurricane in which it looked like one. But we were fortunate in the sense that this sucker never really made it to landfall in those key areas we think about when hurricanes are their strongest. The Gulf of Mexico, the Carolinas. And so if a hurricane makes landfall at Category 4 or Category 5, that's where devastation is done. Fortunately, because of wind shear, like a few other 2023 hurricanes, wind shear helped to keep this sucker off the coast. And then it didn't really go until we had up here in New England, up in coastal Maine, the Atlantic provinces of Canada, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, this particular area up here, New Brunswick. This particular area up here was where it was an extratropical, so a very devastating low pressure system, but not a hurricane. Further, because this sucker hung out 5, 6, this is the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th. We had, first off, it, slowly was moving. I mean, this is not a lot of movement. And so this is doing a lot of damage, but fortunately, there's nothing here. This is water. What we had was all this particular area. We pretty much knew you had about 4 or 5 days this was coming your way. Because there was some concern about it coming this way. However, once we knew the truck was coming this way, as far as this hurricane, not a major hurricane, but still a hurricane, once it was coming up towards the New England, the northeastern United States, these people had plenty of time to prepare. Nonetheless, still a lot of property damage. There were deaths, kind of from some indirect and directly related from this, but nothing like the devastation if this would have hit the Atlantic, the southeast coast here, or the Atlantic Ocean, or made it to the Caribbean. This is an image from NASA's Earth Observatory, a great place to find images of hurricanes. This is the image of the day that shows Hurricane Lee. And when I'm talking about a perfect hurricane, I get it, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, as they say. But this is a perfect hurricane. We see that perfect spiral, round shape, those bands coming from all different directions, coming into the center, a clearly defined eye. We can see that center, even though it's not a bit hazy in this image. There's other images that shows a perfectly clear eye. This is what I'm talking about as far as a quintessential, beautiful looking hurricane. Another great site to go to find satellite imagery from a particular hurricane, and it does a good job using, once again, a lot of those eyes in the skies I've discussed earlier in the semester to help show our hurricanes from different vantage points, from their origin to their eventual destination. This is brought to you from the Colorado State University, their CIRA. Here's a satellite image. It shows the origins of what will be Hurricane Lee as it comes off of the coast of Africa. And this does a good job of also showing day and night, so you can kind of see how this moves over time. Go ahead and put it in motion. So this is our rotation that you're going to start to see. And so this has been coming off the coast of Africa. We can see that spin happening. And so this is where the climatologists, the people, the meteorologists, the people who study this stuff, they can already see the recipe, the cocktail, the ingredients for a hurricane long before it forms. And you can kind of see that already with that rotation in the tropical area. This is what I mean as far as a clearly defined eye. You can see that during a couple different times as far as this particular hurricane re-intensifying right there, boom. So beforehand I've mentioned this. This is a perfect example of a hurricane in terms of what one looks like. This is it. And then now it's starting to hit the northeast coast, where it's also interacting now with a mid-latitude cyclonic system that's also coming now through here. And then it's eventually going to wander off to the north and to the east as it goes away. In this particular cluster of storms coming off of the African coast is what will eventually become Hurricane Lee. I'm going to go ahead and zoom into these particular dots we see in the Atlantic Ocean, and those are the islands that are from the country called Cape Verde, or Cabo Verde, since it is Portuguese speaking. This particular cluster of storms is going to come off of the African coast, and it's going to start to form a rotation. As you see there, already there's one that precedes and another one there. Quite common, once again, in this particular area around Cape Verde to have these low-pressure centers coming off of the African coast and eventually making their way across to the west, across the Atlantic Ocean to us in North America. 3 to 4 days later, on September 4th, we start to see more rotation and continue to see precipitation and stormy weather. I switched to a different view, but this is a little bit more zoomed out using the wind at the surface. So this is when we have a tropical depression now declared, and our point right there, that is essentially coming off the coast where we first identified what would eventually be Hurricane Lee. Notice further that we have convergence. We have this trade winds coming from the north and trade winds coming from the south, combining to create that rotation, create that convergence, and eventually triggering that low pressure center. 1 day later, we now have a tropical storm, as now with that rotation has definitely picked up even more. And very quickly, I'm going to take a look at what's happening at a little higher altitude in the atmosphere as Hurricane Lee is now moving over the warm waters of the Atlantic just north of the Windward Islands, just north of the Caribbean islands. So this is at a higher altitude. I'm just going to put it in motion. We can see Hurricane Lee, but nonetheless, what we can also see is what's happening in front of it. Is it having a head-on collision? Right now, it's not. Nothing's really preventing it from moving towards the Atlantic coast of the United States. So it's just kind of coming along. And then boom, it gets close to the Atlantic coast and it starts getting pushed away by that low pressure area, that migrating mid-latitude cyclonic system, and this upper level system, this upper level winds helping to steer it towards the north and eventually towards the east.